gentlemen, welcome to the program. I am your host, Chris George Zuger, and you have entered the Den of Lore. Pull your chair up to the fire, hit that subscribe button, and we're going to learn some cool shit tonight. If you got your glass of scotch kicking around somewhere, from a great man, Mr. Walter Bosley, former secret agent man himself. We're going to be talking about the real secret space program, not that woo-woo bullshit that's been out there the last couple of years, actual breakaway civilizations, the possibilities of, actual remote viewing, and, aliens, UFOs, and the like. Stick around. If you've heard him on THC, you know that he's probably one of the best interviews that you can get, and I am extremely privileged to have him on the show with all of you here today. For everybody, welcome to the program. I'm in the top right corner because we're actually using Zoom today. Walter, how you doing?
Great. It's good to be on. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, thank you very much. Before we do get going, though, I did want to be able to thank those individuals out there who sponsor our show. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, fuck, here's a commercial that he's going to come on with. No, we do not have corporate sponsors on this show. Why? Because I like to be able to say whatever the fuck I want on air. So we have a Patreon account. You can go check out patreon.com/Den of Lore. You can donate for as little as $1 a month and keep us growing and going strong. To our illustrious masters who donate a minimum of $99 a month. And they're the people who have essentially been allowing this show to go on as long as it has been, with my daughter having arrived, along with our masters who have been with me since the beginning. To Jackie from across the pond, Pat from Brooklyn. To our masters, Miss Jenny, Dolbermere, Lee, Chuck Schwartz, Jared Thompson, Mrs. Fox, Roses, Wayne, Joshua E. Maddock, Mark Catalano, and our den mother, Ellen McCurdy. And also to the rest of our patrons who donate $1 to $5 a month. Nick Zed, or Z for all of you Americans out there, Corey Yurt, Charles Davis, Tiago Barrower, Michael Eckhoff, Dean John Kenward, Anthony Derry, Atlantic Kush, Venice from Magical Egypt, Christopher Moody, Robin Webley, and courtesy of denoflore.com's PayPal button hobby. Welcome to the show, and that is the only commercial you hear on here, besides, the occasional glass of scotch suggestion. Before we get going, I've been getting a lot of mail recently. As you may know, this show's been growing leaps and bounds over the last year. We get about 60,000 people who listen and download a week at this point, which is insane. I also have as many messages through YouTube as I do through Facebook at this point. And, just for, I haven't read out the comments in a while. This is from Special Agent Rob Prices. I believe Prices. Special Agent Rob Prices. And he writes, I'm Special Agent Rob Prices, and I will be investigating and subbing. Well, Special Agent Rob, welcome aboard. Nice to have you. Let's see, this one's from... Cryptic Cowboy, and Walter, I think you'll appreciate this one. This was with regards to our Death Threats from Sphere Being Alliance episode of Enigmas and Shit. And this was with a good friend of the show and contributor, and one of our co-hosts, one of our main guys, Michael Huntington. We do that show, try to get it done every single week. Mm-hmm. Very hard to be able to do with a 2-month-old, I could tell you that.
Right.
I haven't slept really in 10 days, my goodness. And this one's from Cryptic Cowboy, and he writes in, I never trusted that little weasel David Wilcox since the first time I heard the guy. Claiming to be the reincarnation of Edgar Casey. I checked out the Corey Good nonsense when he first came onto the scene, and I just couldn't inject that shit into me anymore. Fuck Corey Good, and fuck David Wilcox. Have a nice day, enjoy the show. Cryptic, thank you very much. I was having a shitty morning when you wrote that in, and that actually made my day. So thank you very much for that encouragement and for joining in on the shitting on the shills that are the cock and good, or good cock. Good cock. We'll call him good cock. Go with that. Blue chickens. There we go. See? And this one is coming in from Ali Abbas, who writes, this was from a couple of days ago with regards to one of our pyramid specials from last April, and he writes, I just finished the rest of the show today. Very informative. Do you have any ideas of where the pyramid, or why there is a pyramid on the US dollar? Also, what's the connection with Freemasonry? Well, and as you all know, if you have your glasses ready, being a Freemason, I can actually answer this question. In 1782, the Eye of Providence was adopted as part of the symbolism on the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. It was first suggested as an element of the Great Seal by the first of the three design committees in 1776, and is thought to be the suggestion of the artistic consultant Pierre-Eugène de Similitière. And that's closest to the French you can actually get it. I'm in Canada. I learned French, so... in his original proposal to the committee, du Cimetière, I'm just going to say Pierre Eugene, placed the eye over shield symbolizing each of the original 13 states of the Union. On the version of the seal that was eventually approved, the eye is positioned above an unfinished pyramid of 13 steps, again symbolizing the original 13 states, but incorporating the nation's potential for future growth. The symbolism is explained by the motto that appears above the eye, Anuit Keptis, which I can't even pronounce Latin, meaning Providence, God approves or has approved of our undertakings. Bill Ellis, professor emeritus of the American Studies at Penn State, has stated that the pyramid was seen as the kind of human structure that lasted out the ages, which, as we can see, it has. He also says that the Founding Fathers wanted the country to last as long as the pyramids did. So... that's, the Eye of Providence in Freemasonry means that the Eye of God's always watching over us to make sure we don't do any bad, evil shit. So, yeah, like the whole black magic thing, that shit don't happen. Most of the guys are kind of too old to really do that type of stuff. It's kind of hard to do that when you're, in a walker.
It's a lot of coffee drinking and cake eating.
And pancake, and virgin sacrificing. Don't forget that.
Yeah, and the haggis on Scotia night.
This is also true. Robbie Burns night.
Okay, yeah. It's been years. You are much closer to masonry activity than I am.
Well, it's also Groundhog Day today, I'm being told. So,
yes,
mentioning Robbie Burns night is coming up soon. Happy Groundhog Day. At least here in Canada, we're having an early spring. That global warming shit is kicking in, apparently. And apparently south of the border, you guys are screwed. Except for you, because you're in California.
Yeah, we're having those mid-80s days, and then after the sun's been down an hour, you're putting a light jacket on.
Well, as long as it's not raining too bad. And as long as it's like above freezing.
I love the rain. We just had we've been dumped with rain, thank God. And we could use a lot more.
I've seen a lot of the fires that are going out there, and it's insane. I'm just glad at least that you're in an area that is relatively safe.
Yeah. That right now, we're not having difficulty with that. But every once in a while, these mountains, because the mountains are just right here. Essentially, where I live is at the foot of the San Bernardino Mountains, south end of the San Bernardino Mountains. And I'm only like a 20-minute drive up the hill to Crestline, 30 minutes to Lake Arrowhead. So.
And how did you end up in California? Because you've got a very interesting resume. You're currently an investigator of historical occult mysteries, author of pulp fiction novels, and you're a screenwriter who has appeared on History Channel's Ancient Aliens. It's like we've had a lot of the talking heads from there on the show. So we've got another celebrity, ladies and gentlemen. And after 19 years, you also you were 19 years in national security, and you're a licensed private investigator in California, where you also run a small press publishing company, Lost Continent Library, founded in 2002. And you've traveled much of the world, both on the job and off, including trips through Mexico and South America with David Hatcher Childress, whose WEX magazine has published articles by yourself. And you're born in San Diego, and attended SDSU, where you earned a BA in journalism, and you've been employed by the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and you're on inactive reserve for the U.S. Air Force, which you have served as a special agent of the AFOSI while on active duty. And while you were there, you were counterterrorism operational consultant for 6 years following military service. So again, thank you very much for keeping us safe. Your service is appreciated. And let's see, you'll also spend time writing fiction, nonfiction, and investigating strange mysteries. So that's one of the reasons why you are here. How did you get into the military first off?
They were desperate. Actually, they had done what's called a RIF, for reduction in force, in the early 90s. And they had the Air Force discovered that they had cut their company grade officer corps a little lower than they wanted to. So they were looking to recruit OTS candidates. And I was 29 when I went in, and I thought, okay, I'm going to be the old guy because most of these other guys are going to be fresh out of college. And I had the good fortune of being in an officer training class that was about 90% what they call priors. And that's prior enlisted guys. So these were guys that were pretty much close to my age, and they had already been on active duty for some years as enlisted guys. They were senior NCOs. So they knew, what the training thing was all about. They knew all the tricks, how to keep your boots shiny and how to stay out of trouble with the FTOs and all that. So that and my background made me appealing to OSI because I had worked for the FBI for close to 6 years, 5 years and some months, and OSI wanted me. So I was what you call a direct acquisition, whatever. I knew that I was going to be going OSI the day I reported to OTS. How it usually works is you find out what you're going to be doing as an officer about a week before commissioning graduation. But I knew going in that I was going to be an OSI agent. So it was really just the FBI experience and the reduction in force.
Now, tell me about your time at the FBI, because at least as far as you can actually tell us, because I know that a lot of the work that you did was either top secret or was protected, and especially if cases are, if there's somebody who's in witness protection or what have you, or if there's information that is related to national security or the security of another, you can't disclose it. But being in the FBI, were you there your entire adult life? Did you enter in right out of college? How did you get into law enforcement?
Well, I got out of college. I finished college in December of 1985. I did my walk, the graduation ceremony in June of '86. And my uncle, an uncle of mine who became my mentor, he encouraged me to go apply to the Bureau in the fall of 1987. So I was out of college almost 2 years at the time I applied to the Bureau. And he advised me, take whatever they give you, because sometimes they have a freeze on agent positions. Sometimes they just say, okay, for 6 months or a year, we're not taking any agent applicants. So I went ahead and applied because he said, you could become an agent once you're in. And that's true. So I applied, and they offered me a job as a mail clerk. I started as a GS3 mail clerk, and I only did that for 45 days. I was promoted to evidence technician. I was an evidence technician for about 6 months in LA and San Jose. When I was sent to Quantico and brought into counterintelligence by being trained as a surveillance operative. They have non-agent personnel who serve on the counterintelligence, counterespionage surveillance teams. Mm-hmm. Basically, I followed spies, Soviet agents, KGB guys, GRU guys around San Francisco, and anywhere our targets went. I think I went to Reno a couple of times, and we intercepted a East German once down by LA. But I did that for probably a little over a year, and had taken the language aptitude test and scored the highest in my division, San Francisco division. And so they wanted to send me to Russian language school. And so I did that. And for 11 months, trained in basic Russian and was sent to Manhattan. I worked on an undercover squad in Manhattan, basically what we call sitting on a wiretap, listening to recorded conversations of known and suspected Soviet agents, primarily GRU, what I was assigned to. And did that for 3 years, and then made the jump over to the Air Force into OSI. So I was all but about 7 months, give or take, of my time in the Bureau, I was in counterintelligence the whole time. And you can't talk details of operations, but, generally, you start with a top secret clearance if you're a Bureau employee. Now, when I started, I didn't have to take a polygraph, but after that, I think in the late 90s, they started giving polygraphs, even if you were just going to be a support employee, a non-agent person. In fact, I took my first polygraph when I went into counter-espionage operations, when I was chief of that branch at Wright Pat. I think that was my first polygraph, if I'm not mistaken. They don't worry me. I've taken a few. I'm not going to lie to them, and I don't have anything shady in my past to worry about, so I don't get worked up over polygraphs like a lot of people do.
With the work that you were doing, and I know without going into to specifics, how bad was the I'm going to say the Red Menace? Like if the Soviets were walking around the West Coast at that point, and or even in Manhattan, like were they was it as bad as people say, like or as the stories say? Like I'm not talking like Tom Clancy shit, but
well, what do you mean bad?
How bad were the attempts at infiltration? Were the methods sophisticated in terms of recruitment that some people claim? Was there ability to infiltrate organizations or companies or just cause shit as sophisticated as people claim that they were?
Well, here's how it works. Basically, it's called a game. And we are doing the same thing in these other countries as they're doing here. And essentially what these guys are trying to do is cultivate relationships with Americans who can provide them useful information on the military, of course, anything national security, but particularly industry. And they will cultivate these relationships in their spare time. For instance, if you're a KGB officer, okay, you're assigned to San Francisco. Well, you're going to be assigned in their version of the State Department, and you're going to have a legitimate job in their foreign office, where you're the representative to San Francisco for tasks, or you're the food or agriculture representative, right, for their Soviet Foreign Office, to use that context. But in the evening and in your off time on weekends and your lunchtime, whatever, because you're also a KGB or a GRU officer, what you're doing in your social time is cultivating these relationships. Let's say as agriculture official, you meet some American that can help the Soviet Union. So what you do in your off time is you go to baseball games with them. You do picnics with your families, just anything that you can do to get close to that individual. Now, you want to get close to them to determine if, you can use them unwittingly, like pump them for stuff and they don't realize they're giving you useful stuff, or if you can either turn them to your side for ideological reasons, or you can compromise them. We do the same things in foreign countries. So our job as FBI, for example, when I was with them, is to be watching these guys who through either intel we know that they're a KGB officer or we have reason to suspect. What we do is we watch them, we surveil them, physical surveillance, we wiretap their phones, we try to determine which Americans that they're making friends with, and we keep an eye on them as much as possible. And we will go to one of these Americans and we'll be working them to see if we can run them against the Russian that's trying to cozy up to them. It's a delightful game that I enjoyed playing very much. But they're not running around, sabotaging things. They will use technology to communicate in interesting ways. They will also do their best to get to restricted areas. The wiretap guys, when I was on physical surveillance, it was before I did wiretap, and we would get word through the case agent, that the Russians would be pissed off because they would put in a request when they were going to Southern California to take their kids to Disneyland. They wanted to take the straight shot, and they weren't allowed to because that would take them to Silicon Valley and past a couple of bases. So State Department would tell FBI that's what they want to do, and the Bureau would say, nope, it's a national security concern. And so they would have to go back to the Russian and say, sorry, you got to go the long way. And then on the wiretap, we'd hear them talking between themselves. They were pissed off that they couldn't, because they do that. They want to go by and see what they can see as they pass a base. The other thing they want to do is, and this is what GRU guys do, they want to count the mile markers to see if how accurate the maps are, because we will do maps purposely and accurately for national security reasons, honestly. I don't know if you've done much cross-country driving. I've done a ton of it. And I noticed for years, it's like, hey, wait a minute. The map or the road sign says X number of miles, but my odometer is showing that it's a mile off, give or take, in some cases. Well, that's done on purpose, is what I learned. Maybe they don't do that anymore, but this is the kind of things that a GRU agent would do, would want to drive from San Francisco to Disneyland and be checking those miles. And, okay, why would they want to do that? Well, let's say we got into World War III and they needed to, troop movements, aircraft maneuvering, missiles, for instance. It's their job to know the accurate distances for such things. And again, we would do the same thing over in, the bloc countries.
Now, in your time in the Bureau, did you ever have to, put your body on the line for national security and, maybe seduce a very hot Russian spy, named Olga or something? I know guys here in Canada who did that for a number of years during the Cold War, and, they never confirmed, but they never denied it.
No, see, in the Bureau, when I started with them, I was married to my first wife, and I met my second wife while in Russian training. So I have to say that, I was a good boy during those years, and the kind of work I did, nope. But, in the old days in the Bureau, you had a lot of fun if you went to training. So you didn't have to go after Olga. And I'll leave it at that. But all consenting adult behavior, by the way. So,
what was the most, without giving too much away, what was the most interesting op that you were on or had actually witnessed?
In the Bureau?
Yeah, well, in terms of a counterintelligence or counterterrorism, dealing with these, with the Soviets, what's the craziest thing you've seen?
When you're on a surveillance team, you're providing that service for case agents, okay? The actual agent who's assigned to Ivan, okay, a particular spy. And so you're actually not privy to all the things in the case file. You're just following Ivan so many days a week he's on the rotation, and you're reporting what he does. So you do get to see some cool stuff. Now, I mentioned earlier that they used interesting means of communication, devices, and excuse me. We one time we were on a target, and they were using this stuff, and unfortunately, I can't say anything about it, even if it's been depicted on a TV show, like a TV show perhaps by a guy named David Lynch in the early '90s that might be called Twin Peaks. That was kind of funny. There's something I wasn't allowed to talk about. One night I'm watching that show, and here's a guy doing it on a TV show, but I still, can't say what it was. But so it was things like that, because I wasn't really the case agent, and I didn't know all the details of what they were doing. Or I'm sorry, all the details of what the whole thing was about, and all the details about what they might be doing while we're observing them. So while we're watching them do a very mundane thing, when this communication device I'm talking about is built into mundane things, what they actually could be doing is something major. And that gets into the nuances of surveillance. Through most of my career, I have done physical surveillance, and I kind of market myself as a PI, as a physical surveillance specialist. I have mostly done physical surveillance work for other PIs who don't have my experience, or their operatives don't have my experience. And I love it. Not everybody loves physical surveillance, but it's kind of an art form.
Well, you're being an investigator and also being an author, especially dealing with more of the nuts and bolts style of UFOs. Have you ever considered, private eyeing certain individuals who may or may not be portraying themselves as as something that they're not, and actually getting a good scoop on it?
The only opportunities, and what I was speaking before the last several minutes was just my FBI experience. As an OSI agent, the answer on interesting stuff is a whole other story. Yeah, that's a yes, because I was an agent. But yeah, on the issue of, you're talking about like these stolen valor guys, or these, saying they were something they're not. Is that what you meant?
Well, I was more like we all know that Wilcock and Good are full of shit. Like, you get like a really good 20 megapixel SLR with a telescopic lens on it, and just like get them doing some crazy ass shit and put that on the internet. If you want them to go away, that's an easy way to do it.
The way I look at it is, we all have our crazy ass shit that we do, and we wouldn't want it out there, I would have no trouble if there was some criminal fraud type stuff going on, or not always criminal, because I do domestics work, which is wife cheating on the husband kind of stuff. That's not necessarily criminal, but it's breaking a contract, so it is defrauding a contract. But if they were doing something where they were actually defrauding like attendees at a conference, or people sending them money, that I would get into, because my line is, if you're committing a crime in this particular field with those guys, then I'd be really hell yeah, I would do that. But in actuality, because I'm also in this field, it would be a bad idea for me to take that kind of assignment. It would be kind of a conflict of interest thing, because I'm a guy out there who's in their same field, and here I am trying to slam them. So
I can understand that. It would be funny to actually have David actually have somebody tailing him for once, instead of the bullshit that he constantly pulls out of his his ass. Like I think he claimed to have his brake lines cut, and that was a big thing.
Oh,
and it's
that's please give me a friggin' break.
It's like, no man, your car is a piece of shit.
Well, it always comes down to, you hear these people make these claims, and when you get them to tell you more about it, and they start discussing the details, that's invariably when it starts falling apart. That's when they start doing the hemming and hawing, or you find out the car is old and there's nothing going wrong with it that anyone has done. But yet they milk it and they push it out there, and there's a lot of people, because they're excited by the BS, that just eat it up.
Now, are you part of the Dark Alliance? Do you hold a special code name? And
I have.
are you affiliated with a somewhat light, author / journalist who may be a dark journalist?
Oh yeah. See, that's the thing. I'm associated with the Dark Alliance, all you Dark Alliance guys, but I have never actually been named. I don't think they want to give me the recognition or the satisfaction.
Well, because then you can make T-shirts, and they're supposed to be the only people with swag. So
cool. But see, you guys have a lot more a piece of the market than I do. A lot more people watch you and know who you are than know who I am, I think.
And the people who do know me, just like Chris, yeah, that guy's fucking annoying. Getting on to the more serious subject matter at hand, I know Lee's been waiting on this one, and he's asking about your thoughts about one David McGowan. He's was an investigative journalist, author, and internet activist focused on deep politics. Was a early critic of the U.S. government's official narratives about the events of September 11th, 2001. Died at age 55 on the 52nd anniversary of assassination of JFK, 6 months after being diagnosed with an unusually aggressive form of lung cancer. Have you heard of him? Or I believe there is one more. David McGowan and Laurel Canyon.
What were the circumstances of his? Specifically of his death? Did he die in the hospital of this, or was he one of those people who killed themselves?
Let's see.
Because I don't know the situation by the name. I'm not recognizing it. And I hate to disappoint folks, but I don't spend time on, collecting the playing cards for the deep state discussions and stuff. I'm a big picture guy, and to me, when I feel like I understand the big picture of where people fit, the details only matter to me if I have a reason to, and that's comes from being an investigator and an agent. It's if I have a reason to focus on somebody, you bet I'm going to be finding out all the details. But until I have a reason, I'm usually paying attention to the other things I think I need to do.
Well, it's not showing here, at least on this board, because I'm looking at wikispooks.com. I didn't even know this existed until now. And it just says on June 15th, 2015, he posted the following on his website, which is just a lengthy video of saying, I didn't really have a healthy, it's incurable. I didn't have it didn't have that healthy of a diet or lifestyle, but he was relatively healthy throughout his life. And apparently it just came on. Didn't take drugs, never broke a bone, that type of thing. And he's saying that, all of a sudden it was replaced with just pain and cancer that was very aggressive and uncurable. Now, I know that when it comes to lung cancer, and I don't necessarily have an experience with it, I lost a dog to it. And I can tell you right now is that until the week that she died, we thought she was 100% healthy. We didn't know that she had lung cancer. Lung cancer is one of those silent killers. You don't know you have it until it's too late. And whether he had... and it's also one of those cancers also that doesn't come on unless you actually have something. You have to be breathing in some shit, or you have to smoke, or you have to be around chemicals, on a regular basis, or asbestos, that type of thing. That will give you that lung cancer. Otherwise, lung cancer comes out of other cancers. You usually get lung cancer if it metastasizes from something else. So that's all I have on that. But for that one, Lee, I'm sorry, we have no.
Well, I will say the general situation sounds suspicious to me when, these guys who are looking into certain things and they get cancer or, they killed themselves. I'm in that camp of,
How old are you?
54.
Okay, so you're within about that range. And you're researching, or at least writing about UFOs, and you're writing about the more interesting subject matters. Are you worried about something like this befalling you, or have you taken steps to protect yourself? How does a former, special investigation officer and a special investigator with two different branches of the government, one of the military, one of the government, avoid this type of shit happening? Talking with what you're, with what you're doing. Did you pay somebody off with some scotch, or like how does it work there?
Well, you'll notice that I write about, things 100 years ago.
Oh,
That helps. um, but seriously, you'll notice that contributes to why I don't get into the inside baseball on everything, the here and now. I'm sincerely interested in the background and trying to fill in those gaps. Because everybody thought that the military-industrial complex and the history of UFOs only goes back as far as the Nazis. I'm speaking generally. When I've shown that I've taken it back to the 1850s and a little earlier. I'm sincerely interested, genuinely interested in the historical aspect, but the side benefit of that is, I'm not aiming too many lights and poking too much around the modern stuff. Now, that said, my first trilogy of nonfiction books, Empire of the Wheel, I had people watching me. I had an interesting experience with the coroner's office. I had a guy follow me literally from the front of my house around my neighborhood. I've been confronted by people in public places, not violently, just, and I was, introduced to an interesting character who made it clear that I was being watched and the stuff I did. Now, the average person would say, oh my God, that's scary. And, I remind associates that find that scary of what I used to do. I was a federal agent, and you kind of have to take those risks of meeting with people who might mean you harm sometimes to get things. My personal, I'm one of those guys. When I was an agent, there was a saying we had amongst us: better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. I am willing to go the full measure to defend myself or innocent people around me. And, I think the people that look at me probably understand that. But, I'm also I was a counterintelligence agent. Okay. When you're an agent who's doing fugitives and white collar crime and, the closest thing that the regular agents would do that I did was, when the guys are doing organized crime, because it's very similar to going after spy organizations. Those guys get what I'm saying. In counterintelligence, it's less dangerous than in organized crime, particularly when you're working domestically. It's all a chess game, and when you arrest a spy, they're usually kind of a nerdy guy. It's like, oh, I'm caught, and they offer their, hands for the cuffs. So you're not dealing, every night with somebody getting ready to knock you over the head when you walk out your door, but you're trained to deal with dangerous people. When I went into counterterrorism, when I was doing counterterrorism, there was kind of the standing order that if any questionable foreigners showed up at home where you lived, you had to report that, because what you were doing on the other side of the world wasn't supposed to be following you home. To answer your question, I hope I don't worry about it, because I know what to do in the event of A, B, or C. Did I meander too much off your question?
Not. I don't even remember what the question was. That's fine. But so
Sorry about that. I do that sometimes.
We're very similar in that regard, and that's kind of why I like you. I'm just like, we rant and we rave, and then we forget where we came from. But everything turns out okay.
What were we talking about again? You were asking about if Jesus, it's something to do with dangerous situations, I think, or worried about. We were talking about the guy who got cancer. Am I worried about, here's my view on that. Look, these people who can give you cancer synthetically or by injecting you with it, I got news for you. They can get into your house no matter what you put on your house. They can put in your beer or your milk or your water. If they want to do it, they're going to get to you. There's nothing you can do. So therefore, you can't worry about it. You just can't. You have to live your life and wash your hands as much as possible, reasonably smell the milk, look at the water, but if they want to kill you with a disease, they're going to get you.
Well, this is why the whole Wilcock thing always kind of pissed me off, because it's like, oh, the CIA is trying to get me. I'm like, motherfucker, if the CIA wanted to kill you, you'd be dead. They don't fuck around with that. They don't miss. Unless it's intentional.
When people say the CIA, the FBI, look, if anybody in those organizations is doing this bad, nefarious stuff, I guarantee you they're not doing it representing the organization. They are a rogue or clique element embedded within. And yes, they're using the tools and in some cases the authority they have within that agency, of course. And that is what we call a misuse or an abuse of that authority and those tools. But, it's more of a clique. And this gets us into try to identify the ideology of the individuals that you can identify or you suspect would be involved in such activity, because there's how you're going to identify the clique and their motives. So in other words, instead of demonizing CIA or demonizing FBI as an organization, that's the wrong way to go about it. And on the subject of this memo, I think what this memo does is kind of illustrates what I'm saying. You have to look at the individuals and see where their ideology emerges, especially where it should not. Because remember, 90-something% of the employees at the Bureau are doing it the right way. And they're what you and I would call, anybody listening would call, good people. Same with CIA. Now, yes, I met a bigger number of assholes in my encounters with the CIA than I did anywhere else, but it was still not the majority of the organization, just a bigger number than I had encountered, comparatively to other organizations. Yeah, I mean, I will admit there's something about the CIA culture that particularly in the last 20, 30 years has festered. And there's, little pockets of stupidity and just shitty people.
Oh, it's like with the McDonald's that I worked at when I was 15, and to the guys in the CIA, I'm not comparing you to McDonald's, so chill out. I'm using it's called an analogy. It's a comparison of like events in my own life to try and relate to you guys. So chill out. And I'm in Canada, so they'd send CSIS after me probably. At least they'd get donuts. We had about 120 employees that I think it was my third job. And there was a group of guys that I would hang around with, and we were the young teenagers who smoked pot and passed food to one another over the counter type of thing. And we were, well, I was probably the more productive and actually giving a shit about doing a good job. But it's if you're 15, you're like, oh, I want a free burger, no problem. Your friends want a free burger, you get them a free burger. And you have that agreement that you keep things in the down low so that the manager or the salary managers didn't find out about it, so that you would keep your job. But it was a small percentage. A lot of the people there were just, they wanted to come in, make their money, and go home. And I would assume it'd be something very similar to that on a much grander.
Well, it's more of it's kind of like that, but the definition in their case of doing your job is, at the risk of sounding cheesy, the overwhelming majority of people in the operational world are what you'd call, true believers in what it's supposed to be about. They really believe in what they're doing, and they're there for the mission to do what they're supposed to be doing, and then go home at the end of the day alive, or at the end of the mission, whatever. And they would like to think that their, colleagues and their, superiors, bosses think the same way. And for the most part, they do. And it really crushes them and breaks their heart when a few bad players are just, having the whole effort be characterized. I still have contacts in the FBI, and over the last couple of years, I've heard the stories about how angry and disgusted the folks there were with some of the stuff that had been going on with certain supervisory level people. So that's why I like to try and make that distinction and remind people, hey, it's not the whole organization. The charter of the organization is not you will be an asshole to the people. That's not it at all. It's quite the opposite. But you're dealing with human nature, so you're going to have ambitious knuckleheads, dickheads who are just out for themselves, and the kind of guys that a lot of these guys, they're not good doing the job. They're not good in the field, so they go management, and that's why you have knuckleheads a lot of times in management, because they don't have any kind of natural investigative talent. They don't have that curiosity in their psyche, or that thing that just makes you a natural investigator. So they go management, and in many cases, they do well there, and that's really their calling. Because you have guys on the supervisory level whose job it is to make sure the guys out in the field have the resources and such, and they're really good at that, and they respect what the mission is, and they like it. So that's where they aim their strengths. And again, most of them are working to be that. But yeah, absolutely, you have your certain number of knuckleheads, and this is why we believe in individual accountability, right? This is why we believe in, let's identify who bad apples are. Okay, let's shove a boot in their ass and get them out of there. And why we always have to be vigilant. It's why every law enforcement and every intelligence agency has an internal affairs department. If human nature, you could hire a bunch of good people that never do wrong, you would never have to have internal affairs, but unfortunately we do.
Or industry relations for those in the corporate world. They're not there to protect you, they're there to protect the company. So, because they have these types of internal departments which are supposed to be able to investigate individuals that are there, you've been able to avoid this by, as you said, dealing with much older secret space program subject matter. And actually, when I first started researching the secret space program, like way long time ago, I actually ran across one of your theories, which was dealing with the early UFOs. Even back then, we weren't dealing with spacemen necessarily. We were dealing with dirigibles, or dirigible-like, or a Zeppelin-like craft.
I call them contraptions. That's what I call them.
That's steampunk right there. You're up my alley. You see the hat?
Yeah.
All I need is my glasses, and there you go.
I got a few of those.
Let's kind of go through that, just because I know that for some people they may not necessarily know the alleged source of the secret space program. They just hear time traveling space marines on fucking Mars, and they don't know where they don't know the original shit. So let's lay it as an old G laid on me. Well,
it starts with, you have to set aside your perceptions of what we're told history is. You have to be willing, as you consider this, even if it's just temporarily, you have to consider that maybe history is not what you've been taught, that there's some elements of it that have been pushed aside for whatever reason. That's a whole other discussion itself. Once you're open to considering that, the history, for example, of aviation may not be what we traditionally think, that the Wright brothers were the first, on and so forth. Then you can look at the historical context that I present, that's actually out there, with kind of, a different perspective. And you can see where people were working on certain things that led to technologies that people, have only allowed themselves to suspect of the 20th century. For instance, all the lore and legends that, for example, the Nazis were working on anti-gravity. This is for an example. Well, when you look at some of the things that actual German scientists and other scientists from other parts were working on, you begin to think, well, gee, maybe somebody has been working on what we would call anti-gravity for longer than, the Nazis had been around, predating the Nazis. And perhaps they got the idea and some data that went into their research from somebody who had been working on it before them. And when you look for that kind of thing, you do indeed find it. For instance, a guy named Oliver Heaviside in the 1890s was working on something called gravito-electromagnetics, GEM. And I go into that in my book, Origin, in detail, but that's an example of a guy who was working on some stuff that, even if they didn't achieve it, the possibility of some type of what we would call anti-gravity was kind of there in their thinking. And there's also Tesla fooling around with the stuff he did, and a guy named John Keeley, and some other guys. And you begin to see, again, maybe this has been around longer. And if it's been around longer, then how far has it really developed? Now, yes, some of these things I'm describing, there's people that say, oh, that's questionable. But then again, I already prefaced this by saying you got to think outside of your traditional box, okay? Because if something got developed that the mainstream did not want out there, they're going to push it aside, they're going to suppress it and say, what are you talking about? That's not serious. We can't take this seriously because we don't recognize it. You kind of have to take your skeptic's ass hat off and enjoy having an open mind on something that might seem wild and crazy to you in order to get to the nugget of possible truth with it. And all of this is what I was willing to do and take a look at things in the 19th century, specifically because there was a thread of this group called the Sonora Aero Club, who allegedly were building flying machines that use some type of form of anti-gravity in the 1850s. I mean, what the hell? Are you kidding me? This is a joke, right? But that was and that really led me to, the German industrialists of the pre-German unification back in the Prussian era of the early mid-19th century, who, were also involved with some esoteric ideas and hermeticism and things like that. And it's an interesting picture.
Now on screen, this is a photo that I've got up on screen for everyone in chat right now. And it's apparently supposed to be the first claimed photograph of a UFO, which was taken somewhere over the USA. It's a stereograph image from 1870, actually. Again, I can't, this could be 3D generated for all I know. That you can do some crazy shit with Photoshop nowadays.
Yeah.
But this is the type of craft, at least that was apparently seen, and that's like a cigar-shaped, more or less your standard sci-fi human. Looks to be, what you'd see in Blade Runner or Alien, for instance. But then, so there seems to be some type of anachronistic visuals, which kind of makes it a little bit more believable to someone like myself. I'm not sure if you've ever run across something like this, but it's public domain. There you go. This is stereograph formations on rock, not clouds. To say here, so yeah, it's actually could be mountainous region, could be just far off.
Yeah. The issue with a photograph like that is, of course, the provenance of it. It in that article, it says it emerged in 2002. By that time, there were people, that of course were already interested in the airship mystery and things like this. And so unfortunately, until the provenance is a little better. It's one of those things that, I mean, personally, I really hope that's an authentic photograph. That would be totally cool. But unfortunately, we can't embrace it as such for a variety of obvious reasons. But it's like I said, this photo is an example of what I was very awkwardly trying to get to, where, you just have to be willing to look at the historical context differently. And once you do, it does kind of reveal certain things that actually the clues were there. And that's basically what I did with, what I've done on Breakaway Civilization and Secret Space Program stuff and the airship mystery. I've shown where the thread of our space program and Breakaway Civilization goes back to and through the airship mystery to this Sonora Aero Club and their associates of the 1850s. And ostensibly back into ancient times is where the knowledge of some of this came from.
Now, I'm sorry, my Zoom is starting to... I think, okay, no. Oh, there we go, that's why. I'm not used to using Zoom at this point. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. And transition over. There we go. So that was a lot more difficult than I expected. I got to make sure not to use full screen.
I would like to say, I was going on a long thing there to describe, to answer your question, and my answer was long and dry, and that's a good example as to why not a lot of people, but some people will not like what I present, because it's not always sexy, it's not always constantly stimulating and exciting. It's a lot of, plodding through historical context and more dry things. But I think the result and the possibility is what's exciting when you get there.
Do you believe, like, being more of a nuts and bolts investigator type of guy, do you believe that UFOs or extraterrestrials do exist?
Yes. To me, I think it's a logical conclusion. Yeah. And I've been told they exist, so between that and all the other contexts going around, I'm in that camp. ETs, of course, exist, and I think they come and go here.
And have you seen a UFO yourself, or have you investigated anything quite interesting as part of any, or have you not, that you cannot confirm, that you may or may not have investigated while in the Bureau or part of any other extra government organization?
Not in my official capacity, but I saw a UFO a little over 3 years ago with a witness with me. And at this point, I don't talk too much about it publicly because I'm in the middle of doing some analysis and discussing it with some folks. And, I might discuss it in detail in the near future, but it was... it was one of those where it wasn't just a pinpoint of light, up on the satellite altitude. It was a pretty spectacular experience. And so, I believe UFOs are real. I have seen one.
And like for any of the old secret space program discussions that used to be out there, because I know they were really big back in the day, like the TRB-3, Aurora, those were subject matters and secret aircraft that were thrown around a lot in terms of their name, or the fact that they would just create weird sonic booms, or for instance the European wave back in the early 90s of triangle aircraft. That's actually an aircraft that I've seen, that I saw around that around that era. And I was like maybe 5 or 10 at the I was younger than 10. And I know Michael Huntington's seen a triangle craft as well, or at least he claims to. We always claim. Where was the main transition point? Like you said that Corey Goode and David Wilcock came in kind of at the right time, which to me seems like about mid-2000s, like the 2000 knots. So what was the main turning point for most of these most of these craft even being discussed? And is this something that was pushed back by the government to stop discussion on it, or was it just purely and simple a marketing issue that most of these speakers just kind of latched onto?
Well, I think a lot of the people in the field, that write about this and speak about it and tell zany stories in many cases. I think it was just the natural direction that ufology, or ufology, as my friend Joseph Farrell likes to call it, had reached. As far as what I think about the secret space program itself, I think that dates back to the 1950s very specifically. And that's another part of the discussion. But I could see where there's definitely a stake on behalf of that secret program to deflect people from looking too closely at things, from figuring out too many things, from uncovering advanced technology. Because here's what I think is and this is going to answer your question specifically, but what you've got is a secret space program, which is essentially a military program, okay? And so it deals with classified technology, which in my opinion, for the most part, since the 1950s, has generally been 10 to 20 years ahead. I'm just throwing a number out of where NASA and other military craft have been, okay? Naturally, like everything else, as you got into the late 90s, early 2000s with technology taking huge leaps, that has also been the case for the masses being able to look at things and see things. Whereas before they were flying these advanced things around and people had little Kodak Instamatic cameras or Polaroids or their little Super 8, or early crude, home video, they still didn't have to worry about, even in the advent of home video. But in this 21st century, I mean, your iPhone, my iPhone has a as good, if not better, lens than, my HD movie camera that I got 5 years ago. So they're contending with that. And I think they realize that they're not going to keep everything as easily hidden as they used to. So what they have to do now is play a different game, a perception management game. And that means getting a little closer and inking the pool with things that are either just, completely false, or kind of nudge the attention in the wrong direction. Wrong direction meaning, anywhere but on what the thing might really be. And if you have to let people capture images of what you're flying around up there, in order to feed what your perception management is, well, that's good. That'll work, and I think that's what's going on, at least from secret space program involvement in this stuff. And then there's the people doing what I would call legitimate research, and then there's the sideshow freaks, the blue avian, time jumping commando crap.
Now, knowing that you're quite a well-respected individual in the nuts and bolts, and I'm going to say nuts and bolts is still kind of a short form, I'll say rationalist movement within ufology. Knowing that there was a split within the community, because a bunch of us were just sick and tired of the obviously fake bullshit back last year. And how have you been able to sustain yourself in terms of your credibility, knowing that there are individuals out there that may not actually want to deal with you? How have you been able to cope with that?
Oh, well, I feel like in the last several months, I'm one of those who's just been, pushed aside as a non-player in the most of the media attention in our field. I'm certainly not the only one, because there are bigger names in this than me. But yeah, a lot of people, they either want to hear that ridiculous Fantasyland New Agey brand of secret space program crap, or they just want to hear guys like us bitching and moaning about the zany new agey brand. See? So either way, the attention's all on that, whether you're critiquing it or whether you're part of it or embracing it. And, fortunately, my research is diverse. I investigated strange, esoteric, possibly occult murder. Did 3 books of that before I did anything on Breakaway Civilization or Secret Space Program. And then, I've also researched explorers who I think were looking for forgotten technology of lost civilizations, I like to call it. So I fortunately have most of my work on other tracks. So I just kind of jump, to that focus. I have found that there are, a few people who it's starting to grow in numbers that, again, want to hear about the more down-to-earth secret space program type research, like the stuff that Joseph Farrell and Catherine Austin Fitz and some of the more technical expertise guys. What's funny is when I first came on the scene in that stuff, people thought I was the wacky, zany one, when I'm on the stage with Farrell and Fitz and them. But then, the other guys came out, and it shows you how actually tame and more rational my stuff actually is. My only wild thing I ask people to consider is the level of what people were trying in an era where it seems anachronistic. That's really the craziest thing I ask people to consider. And I never debate or bicker. I always say when I'm speculating, I let my readers and people who listen to me decide for themselves. I do not tell people what to think or what to believe. And like I said, I refuse to bicker about stuff.
Now, I kind of take the same tack, and I know that Lee is probably going, Chris, no, you don't. Okay, there's a difference, Lee. What I do is when somebody is completely fucking crazy, I call them out for being fucking crazy. And I've got no problems with that because somebody's got to tell them. At some point, most people, they didn't get slapped upside the head by their parents. And I'm not saying that I'm like their dad or anything. I'm just the guy willing to say that the emperor's got no clothes. Because
crazy, and especially if you think they're just BSing people. That's the other one that needs to be called out.
So like that's kind of one of the things. Like if you first got into this, dealing with contraptions, and I'll use your term contraption because it actually does fit with the time period. You said that you were considered the crazy guy. Why? Because it was anachronistic. What was so different in terms of the technology? Like what was the specific technology that was being discussed or researched back then by these extra government organizations or departments or groups? I guess at that point the government was quite small compared to today. Like how did they do it? Like was it just like coal fire in a balloon that they would send up into the sky? Was there mercury? Like how did they power these damn things?
Well, yeah. In the lore of the Sonora Aero Club, which we have from a gentleman named Charles Delshow, and his material dates back between the 1890s and up to 1923 when he died, which again predates the Nazis. Everybody thinks this stuff all started with the Nazis. No, it didn't. What we have described by him is really what appears to be a chemical process of, or with an anti-gravity result, according to Delshow. Now, right now, there's people that are screaming, saying, he was just an outsider artist. He was just a guy with an imagination drawing pictures. I can't help you there. That's not my audience here. You're just not going to, be comfortable considering that Delshow might very well have been telling the truth as he witnessed it. But it's a chemical process which is very similar, chemical and mechanical process, which when put together is very similar to, this material about ancient Vimanas. And you mentioned the mercury. Yeah, you're talking about what some have come to call the mercury vortex engine, where you have a liquid solution that gets put in a rotating, spinning device So there's a rotation, there's spin, and there's some type of chemical, liquid material going, which causes a reaction which somehow, creates the anti-gravity. That's the basic answer to what you're asking about, what were they working on? And, it didn't require to fly. These things were made of wood and canvas and light materials, and it was proof of concept. That's the thing I like to emphasize. In the 1850s with the Sonora Aero Club, you're talking very much just proof of concept. Okay, I do this chart in my book Origin, and I do it in my talk at the Secret Space Program on screen, where I show the comparison, the analogy. The arrows, these flying machines of the 1850s, are comparable to the Ford Model T. Okay, the Ford Model T was a kind of a proof of concept, early, just basic automobile, right? Okay, then the airships of the 1890s, 40 years later, were a bit more sophisticated and advanced and larger. And that's kind of like what a 1958 Buick was to a Ford Model T. Okay, what the 1890s airship was to the 1850s Aero was what the 58 Buick was to the Model T. And then when you get up to that classic, legendary Nazi flying saucer, or up to the S4 model, right, of the 80s, 90s, or whatever, this is to the airship and the Aero what the 1985 Porsche was to the 58 Buick and the Model T. So you follow me? That's my analogous chart. And in that, between the images that we have from Delshow and his description of what the Sonora Aeros, and I say Aero, it's spelled AERO, like aeroplane and stuff. These arrows, when you see then the description of the 1890s airship, and then of course the Nazi flying saucer that I've just laid out and described with this automobile comparison, you begin to see, well, gosh, yeah, okay, there was a progression, there was a development of the technology. Neither I nor Delshow or anybody else is saying that the 1850s contraptions were the same as a modern flying saucer. That's ridiculous. Nobody's saying that. Some people have accused me of saying that. And the 1890s airships were not the equivalent of, the TR-3 or whatever it is. That would be ridiculous. But what they are is a clear, within the context of the available information, it's a clear progression of this technology that you can see over a period of about 70 to 100 years. And it's compelling if you're willing to give it some serious consideration.
Now, how does this connect to like the ancient past of South America? Because I know you spent a lot of time down there, and I know you've done a few talks on them, but it's always good to be able to hear these things firsthand myself, and I honestly just didn't actually listen to the interview, unfortunately. It's kind of one of those things. I can listen to jazz to keep my daughter asleep, or I can do research. I picked the same choice. I picked the jazz. But how did you connect the two? Because we're dealing with 1800s, and you're also looking at ancient lost civilizations of the Mesoamerica and South America, which we're talking hundreds to thousands of years old. And if you say that Puma Punku was made by aliens, I'm hanging up on you.
I hear you. Okay. I'm not sure I understand the question.
How are your travels to Meso and South America, and trying to connect the origins, the ancient origins of the secret space program, which in the United States started in the 1850s ish? How did you
theoretically?
What to you is the link? What was the aha moment, and how did you carry that forward? How did you try and link the two?
Well, as far as the ancient civilization connection, what I have seen and what I have presented is that you have had for centuries these, Hermetic Society organizations. Freemasons were involved in this. And these were guys who, you're a Mason, that the interest is the lost secrets, the forgotten civilization, the secrets, for instance, that were embedded upon and within Jacob and Boaz and that lost civilization. And they've been searching for the clues and the remaining evidence in hope of reconstructing this lost technology, of which the evidence we have for is like megalithic architecture. You know, some of these old structures you have in South America and literally all over the world that are clearly built in the same style. You know, Childress and Graham Hancock and many others have pointed this out. They've demonstrated this. So as these organizations through a few centuries now, maybe longer, have been looking for this stuff, they've found what they've found. They've analyzed it. They put it together. You know, chances are they found stuff that they haven't publicized, and this stuff, you know, members of these organizations would have access, or they would hire people to go out in the field to find more of it, and those guys would get access. And just through the passage of time, then you have a like-minded organization that decides, let's put this stuff to use. Let's apply this stuff we've found and see what result we get. And that's what I argue, what I hypothesize the Sonora Aero Club was doing. They were guys who had access to this through esoteric hermetic societies.
Now, who were these guys exactly?
The Sonora Aero Club was predominantly German, and this is why in my opinion, how the Nazis learned all the stuff they were doing in this regard, was because it was these German guys who were involved with, you know, the esoteric societies, that world. And the Sonora Aero Club was predominantly German immigrants who came to the United States to get as far away from Europe and specifically Germany as possible. And when they came to the United States in the 1850s, where did they go? They didn't go to New York, or they didn't go to Florida. They went to California. And there were a few Italians in the mix. They were mostly the ranchers who provided a place for these Germans to have their workshops in building these flying arrows and to use them as hangars. And, you know, a few of the Italian ranchers were members and designed some of these things. But it was these German immigrants in the case of the Sonora Aero Club. Now, there were others out there. There was a guy named Solomon Andrews, who I talk about in my book. Michael Busby talks about him in his. And Solomon Andrews, according to a newspaper account from the Civil War era, demonstrated, I think in 1863, a flying machine that was not a dirigible, it was not a hot air balloon, to officers of Lincoln's War Department. And I think Solomon Andrews' technology was obtained by the U.S. government, the U.S. War Department at the time. And after the war was over, I think they started to develop it. And I think that development over the course of the next 25 to 30 years resulted in what we call the 1896 airship mystery.
Now, you mentioned Freemasons, and you mentioned Freemasons a few times, and, you know, we haven't had anyone on the show because I booked the guests, so thank God we haven't had anybody on the show who said that they're evil or that they're trying to take over the world, or, you know, they do all this other crazy shit, which we honestly, you know, well, we get drunk on scotch every now and again. You know, there's the occasional version we do sacrifice to our Dark Lord Baal. May his fires be upon you. And though that one I'm going to get in trouble on. But like, were these guys like, were they bad guys? Were they just some crazy guys who just wanted to build some cool shit and fly around?
Yeah, they were just guys who, first of all, you know, they believed that there was a civilization way back, which was technologically advanced. They believed that they were looking at the evidence of it that had been collected by explorers and archaeologists for centuries leading up to them. And, you know, they wanted to develop this stuff. They, you know, why did the Wright brothers build an airplane? Because, you know, they wanted to see if they could do it. And so these particular guys, you know, would get some information and it would just inspire them, motivate them to do it just to see if they could do it. And there was nothing, in my opinion, nothing nefarious about it at all. Now, it was in the the potential application of it, where the Sonora Aero Club had their difference and their break with the mysterious organization that Del Shao talks about called NIMSA, which I have attempted to extrapolate upon through, my analysis and hypothesis of available, historical info. And they were a very secretive organization, according to Del Shao and in my hypothesis. And they have, I think they're still around, but they had an objective to use what the Sonora Aero Club guys were developing for military purposes and, nefarious industrial purposes, which the Sonora Aero Club guys were opposed to. They did not want their stuff used for military, for war. And so they had a little difference of opinion with their parent organization that we know only as NIMSA.
Now, I've never seen that word before. Like, I've probably heard it. It sounds familiar, but it was probably from a conference you did about 2 years ago. And I've never heard it before. I do not recognize the acronym. Freemasons, we deal with acronyms. That's pretty much most of what our code is acronyms. And I've never seen it before. And, so even for myself, I don't even think it's York right. So it stands for something.
Oh, it's not Masonic.
No.
NIMSA has nothing to do with Masonry.
Okay.
It's not Masonic. They're, you know this as well as I do. You can have guys who are Masons associated with another organization and such, but NIMSA itself, I'm convinced, is an acronym that comes from, it's a German language acronym for the name of the organization itself. And then it also has, kind of like Egyptian hieroglyphs, it has a double meaning in its application. That I get into all this in my book Origin, but it has been around obviously since Del Shao. His stuff was discovered. It was away in boxes, and it was discovered unexpectedly and inadvertently, I guess, in 1971 by a guy named Pete Navarro. He was the first real scholar of Del Shao out there. And then anybody who really looked at the airship mystery, the few guys that wrote stuff out there, Tim Schwartz, Sean Castile, Michael Busby, Theo Pymans, these were the guys who I learned about NIMSA and Del Shao through and from. So it was out there, but it was always out there just usually, pretty much in connection to Del Shao. And some folks had kind of uncovered what looked like a NIMSA connection to the 1890s New York esoteric milieu, that they were backers and fans of John Keeley, who I mentioned earlier, who allegedly was doing stuff with anti-gravity, and fans of Tesla and stuff like that. And that was really all that was out there. And that's where I learned about it. And when I started looking deeper and really analyzing this whole German thing, I came up with a suggested translation of the acronym, what I think the acronym could mean. So that's where this whole analysis of NIMSA is currently.
Now, moving on to, I'm going to skip over the 1920s just because nothing ever good happened there because it had prohibition. So fuck that. I like my booze. Going into Nazi Germany, and I'm going to put my rationalist hat on, and I'm going to challenge you on a point, and I'd like you to be able to respond on this.
Okay.
Is there any evidence of Germany having a UFO? And I'm not going to say, and again, the Operation Paperclip, we only have firsthand accounts. There is still, there's no actual physical evidence. There's no photographs, there's no video, there's nothing beyond a couple of people who said, this stuff happened. At the same time, it's like I could say that I'm Space Jesus, and
Right.
people should pay me money to go to a conference because I'm Space Jesus.
When
So how did you uncover this? The fact that Germany had this technology. What was the evidence that you found? Because I'm hearing the stories. I haven't seen any, like a nut, not a nut, not a bolt. The only thing I've seen is like an archway for the bell, and that could have had
There you
anything
go.
in it. That could have had rockets in it.
Yeah, that thing about the big Stonehenge thing, that's, the closer you look at it, I'm kind of neutral on that. If it proves to have been a thing for the bell, okay, great, I'm fine. But I'm not convinced. But I don't think that the whole argument for the bell rests on that hinge thing. I think that's just a thing that Igor Wachowski saw and pointed to and said, that this is what this might have been. I'm I'm not in that school of thought that thinks the Nazis had a flying saucer. I think that's just stuff that came post World War II that's been mostly made up. Like, people get into this, the Hannibal, it was real. No, no, no. There's no evidence for it. Zero. Um, if I refer to the Nazi UFO thing, I am referring to what they were doing with the alleged bell. Okay, because here's the thing. I think there's more to argue for the bell, for them, doing this thing with the bell, than there is for this Hannibal saucer, for any kind of flying saucer. So no, there is no evidence for a Nazi saucer at all. But this bell thing, and why do I give the bell any kind of legitimacy? Because the description of it, the context, and what we can point to on it is identical to what the guys in the Sonora Aero Club were doing. Here's what's interesting. Stephen Romano, who's a guy who's put out an excellent book on the Del Shao artwork that shows all these arrows, he's pointed some stuff out to me, and we were talking about some of the photos in that, and I saw an image drawn, I think, in the 1890s by Del Shao that is the bell. Now, this was drawn in the 1890s, and the description of how it works is exactly the bell. And that predates, remember, Del Shao died in 1923. Okay, he wasn't friends with Rudolf Hess and all that. He died in Texas. He came to America in the 1850s, and he stayed. And here he is, and on more than one of his images dating back to the 1890s and the 1910s, there's the bell. And I put this in Origin and I think one of my other books. But there's the bell. Empire of the Wheel 2, I think, Friends from Sonora. There it is, inarguably. And it predates the Nazis themselves. So when people say, this bell thing is a bunch of nonsense, there's absolutely no evidence, there's Del Shao, okay? His artwork, a man who was dead before the formation of the Nazis.
Now, Peter in chat is asking, what do you think these German people found? Is it a type of power source? Is it a way to use natural phenomena through physics and chemistry? Or is it a new element, like Lazar says?
Well, with the bell, you have this serum, is what they would call it, that would be pumped in between the counter-rotating cylinders. And Del Shao said that in the 1850s, the German gentleman who was the leader of the group, he had developed this liquid. It was green in color, but this liquid that would be dripped onto the rotating element. In some cases, it was literally bell-shaped. And so there you have the same process. Now, obviously, that's a chemical process that's then causing the desired reaction of anti-gravity. I'm not a chemist. I can't describe the scientific specifics of that, but those are the basics. Now, where would they have got this from? Well, again, you had German esoteric societies dating back to the days of the Teutonic Knights, who were beneficiaries of stuff captured, specifically during the Fourth Crusade in Constantinople, where they had their version of the Library of Alexandria that had a bunch of, lost technology, lost civilization type stuff. And what's interesting is these German esoteric societies really, start forming after that crusade, in part and parcel with the Teutonic Knights. And so through the intervening years, you have these guys doing their little alchemical tests and trying this, that, and the other, until you get to the point where you have these Germans coming to the States, going as far out in the middle of what was then nowhere as they could get, to really try these ideas. So we don't know anything about Peter Menace other than from the Delschau material. But I would argue that he and some of his cohorts were probably members of one or more of these esoteric societies. And that's where they got the information, and they developed it to the point they could. And then that gets built upon and built upon further until you get to the Bell in the 20th century.
Skipping ahead to later on in the 20th century, I'm going to start at least going to more of the nuts and bolts, the actual secret space program, at least what I call just the secret space program. There's the Flux Liner, which was... I'm trying to remember the names. I know that for crying out loud, it was James E. Allen. And he referred to the programs as a history of novel propulsion dealing with electrogravitics, and I think that was like 1950s, 1960s. And recently, you'd have people like Dr. Stephen Greer, whom, like when I first heard of Greer, it was very rationally sounding in terms of the way that the information was presented and how, the technology had a real basis in reality. And then he started talking about interdimensional aliens that would fall around the Pentagon. And I'm like, okay, that's a little out there.
See?
Yeah. And, you're still dealing with these individuals that, were apparently doing almost full diagrams of the Flux Liner, which was your classic kind of half-wedged, half-cone, like take a cone, chop it off the top and the bottom, or top of the middle, and the UFO kind of looked like that with a dome on top. And it was still running off of mercury, like a mercury turbine.
Yeah.
Like, from the 1940s and the 50s with the Nazis and their supposed UFOs, and the fact that Roswell happened, and I know you got a connection with that. How do you link the 90s to mid 2000s secret space program to, let's say, Roswell? What's the timeline for you?
When you say 90s, 2000s secret space program, what do you mean specifically?
In terms of like the usage within the popular culture lexicon, and it being prominent within the conference.
Yeah, that's the medium through which it's discussed. But do you mean this advanced space fleet kind of secret space program?
Well, going from there, like again, Solar Warden is a name that has been thrown around a lot. I know that there was that hacker out of the UK who did apparently had hacked into the Pentagon and did find full manifests.
Yeah.
And whether that's actually true or not, I think it was more or less a I'm just going to throw this out there, and they're going to think I'm so fucking crazy. They're not going to do anything with me. But it had to start somewhere. There had to have been something to it. And in Roswell, some people fall into one of three schools of thought. It was a weather balloon, like it was actually a weather balloon, and they're like, oh, it was a weather balloon. That's it. It was a Soviet weather balloon or some type of Soviet item, which you're saying it was not, or it was actually a UFO. And that's kind of where we started to get the technology from. How can you describe your connection, first of all, to Roswell?
Well, my connection is this, and again, to plug a product, I've written an entire book on this, Shimmering Light. My father had been telling me a story for several years. I've decided that I really needed to dig into it and write about it, see what I could find. But essentially, he, in his bigger story, part of it was he was taken to to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in 1958 and briefed on what happened at Roswell. Now, people say, damn it, Bosley, why was your dad so special? Okay, my dad worked in the aerospace medicine division of the Air Force at that time. He was a physiological training specialist. I worked in a physiological training unit at George Air Force Base, and that dealt with training and preparing pilots for high altitude flight. And he had a very high clearance and was involved in the early days of Mercury when it was an Air Force space program. Our manned space program started with the U.S. Air Force. NASA didn't exist. Now, when NASA was founded, Mercury was handed over to NASA, but I and others would argue that the public face of Mercury, the public Mercury effort, was handed over to NASA. We have no reason to think that the Air Force did not continue pursuit of manned spaceflight. Well, my dad was in that milieu. See, and when I explain what I think the state of the secret space program and its origin was, I'll get into this. But because of what my dad did in the Air Force, he had clearance to be briefed in on space program level stuff. Therefore, he said that a crash had occurred, a UFO crash had occurred in Arizona in 1958, and that he and the other guys he was working with were going to be part of the recovery effort. I have a document showing that he was part of a recovery team, crash recovery team, for airplane crashes and stuff anyway. And on the way to be part of this recovery effort, he and the guys were taken to Wright-Patterson and briefed on what crashed at Roswell. And he said he was told that it was not extraterrestrial, that it was a human civilization that exists on this planet with us, that chooses to remain hidden from, the masses, that kind of thing. And as sexy as that is, and as exciting as that is, and as much as you could point to historical lore and stuff to support that story, I have to be an objective investigator, and I don't care if it's my dad or my mom, okay? I'm going to be objective and look more closely at this. And of course, what I think I found and what my hypotheses and speculations are all in the book. But that's why my dad, if he, truly was briefed at Roswell, and I have no reason to think he wasn't. I was told by a superior officer later in my career that that's true, that he was. That's why he was briefed at Roswell, is because of his background with Air Force, at the time, space technology.
Now, the next question being is that how can you trust somebody who lied to you for the first half of your life? Because if you were led to believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, and you find out that shit's not true before you become a teenager, that's some major shit right there. That's stuff that takes a kid years to get over. I'm telling you.
Did Santa and the Easter Bunny really wrap around your axle that badly?
Oh, hell no. I was always woke. You kidding me? It's like, nah, it's Dad.
To me, I told my kids Santa Claus existed. That's more of that's part of the rite of childhood, and that's part of the enjoyment of childhood. And I don't like the idea of telling children all reality how it is, cold, harsh, and taking away that imaginative. I disagree with that, doing that. So to me, I don't look at it as, I was lied to nefariously. I mean, there are white lies, and damn lies, and I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, well,
Now, remember, I think it's possible that my dad was lied to, that what he told me was a planted narrative, because you got to remember what I discovered that I didn't know was how steeped the Air Force at the time he was in, how steep the Air Force was into MK Ultra. Okay, they were the most enthusiastic government customer of the CIA's MK Ultra plan. The Air Force loved it. Now, in 1973, the CIA had to go before Congress and come clean about their MK Ultra program and everything they'd been doing, good and a lot bad. Guess what? To this day, the Air Force never has had to, and they started their own MK Ultra technology program in the 50s, early 60s. So my dad was telling what he sincerely believed to be the truth.
I'm trying to find information on MK Ultra, and Wikipedia just keeps spitting out. It was an American alternative band that played from 1994 till 1999.
Yeah, that irritates the hell out of me when I'm trying to hashtag or I'm doing something MK Ultra, and that friggin' band is what pops up on the top of the search. They must have paid Google, right?
It's apparently also it's a song by the British rock band Muse from their album The Resistance. And apparently was also a progressive metal band, or from a progressive metal band named Perfury, which had a 2015 album called Juggernaut.
Hey, wait a minute. Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe it was the CIA that paid Google to move that stuff up.
To be able to clarify, like what exactly was the program? Because I've seen it thrown around for a long time. I'm a guy who understands that conspiracy has kept power and let people acquire power for millennia within our civilization. So it's the way that we, we as beings move up the ladder. If you've got a very, very strong alpha, it's up to a bunch of the, it's up to a bunch of the betas to be able to get together to overthrow that alpha, or if
the alpha goes bad, perhaps.
It's the same
actually,
idea.
If one alpha goes bad, the other alphas should get involved with bringing that bad alpha down.
And that's kind of the idea. So, like these types of conspiracy does happen. Rome being a perfect example. So
absolutely.
But even for me, some of the stories that are coming out, and I know that a lot of people may have been embellishing, and there are some people that even I know myself that are they will say I was part of MK Ultra. Okay, do you have any proof? No, but I have all these great stories. I'm like, that's great. I hear you.
Time traveling commando on Mars.
But there is always that precedent. What exactly was the program? How did it start? How did it end? And what do you think the Air Force is still doing with it?
Well, here's when you look at it. Actually, you find that some stuff that you might initially go, oh, that couldn't have been true. You find out, oh, crap, that was true. They were trying to do that. Essentially, in the Cold War, they were paranoid about what the enemy could get from the crews or pilots of downed aircraft. So they got it into their heads that the Soviets and the Chinese were using psychology, to get into the minds of ostensibly, a downed pilot to get what their mission was, that kind of thing. And then they began to believe that what they were trying to develop was a technology of mind control where they could get into that downed pilot's mind and then release him back to the States, and then he would be a remote controlled double agent.
Manchurian candidate.
So this was the concern. So with enthusiasm and much glee on the parts of some scientists, they jumped into, number one, trying to understand what they suspected the Russians and Chinese were doing with this stuff. And then out of that came, well, if we're going to understand what they're might be doing with time control, we need to develop mind control. So they started to develop mind control to understand what the enemy was doing. And then out of that, after they learned all this wild stuff, then someone got the idea, well, wait a minute, we're learning a bunch of things on, theoretically on how to control human minds. Let's see if we can develop this into an operative status. In other words, you have an operative, you want to be able to, just like you see in the movie Manchurian Candidate, you want to be able to call him up, say a keyword, it flips that switch, they go do their mission, they return, you call them at the appropriate time, say the next keyword, the switch goes off, and they theoretically would not remember what they had done operationally. And this was done truly in the spirit of, oh, it'll be great for operational security. If a guy can't remember what, he did on the mission, he won't be talking about it with anyone, right? Well, this is what the objectives were. And out of this, a bunch of nefarious crap was done. If you've watched this Wormwood show on, I think it's Netflix, might be Hulu. I think it's Netflix, yeah. It's all about what I'm talking about here, and specifically the development and use of hallucinogenics. LSD, for example, was developed from German scientists who had done it first, played with it first, but it was greatly developed by the CIA for this program. And Frank Olson ended up jumping out of a window, or being thrown out of a window, and killing himself because they had tested it on him. He was an MK Ultra CIA scientist, and they had tested it on him unwittingly at first. And that was just one example of something going wrong. But they were doing this kind of stuff on other people. And there were guys who wanted to do nasty mind control things, like Dr. Cameron up there in Canada, at the facility in Canada that they were doing this at, the CIA. And he developed what he called psychic driving. And that was where they were trying to pursue the ability to plant false memories in the human mind. And they were having some success with this in the 50s. And it was during this time that the U.S. Air Force was really embracing MK Ultra stuff, and this really turned them on. So that's why I argue in my dad's case that they used psychic driving, possibly, on him and implanted this false narrative in his memory of this other civilization that had gone underground, and this is what crashed, when actually what I propose possibly happened was that a craft from what was our early developing classified space program went down, and he was probably part of a retrieval of that. And for better OPSEC, they MK Ultra'd him. This is my hypothesis based on my research and the info I was given and stuff. But so MK Ultra was all about. And ultimately it was also when I mentioned about having the operative that you could flip the switch, they were trying to develop then assassins using this. That was a serious part of the program, to develop an assassin who wouldn't know what he or she was doing when the switch was off.
Why wouldn't they just use what the Russians do and just put some polonium in your coffee, and then
Well, they for the most part, I don't think there's a whole bunch of MK Ultra assassins walking around out there. Remember, this is what they were hoping to develop, what they were shooting for, and what I think is, your reach should exceed your grasp, or it usually does. I think in the pursuit of this ultimate mind control agent assassin, I think the things they discovered and developed along the way were probably very useful. And do I think the Air Force or anyone in the government would still use this stuff today? Yes, I don't see why not. Have I personally experienced any incidents of it other than the situation with my dad? Not that I'm aware of.
You're one thing I know that you've discussed this a couple of times on your Facebook page, and that's with regards to your ability to remote view. Or at least you've at least dabbled in it, or you've had training in it. Yep. I know that we've got a couple people in chat that we've never seen before. There's Joseph, who is writing, by the way, "The Men Who Stared at Goats Sucks. It's propaganda." You've got individuals, I think it was Craig, who said the books were great. There was varying degrees of believability or opinions on the subject of remote viewing. I'm of the mind that I got to see this shit work firsthand, and I've talked to a couple friends of mine who are like, "Okay, cool. I think we even set up a test with you that I was just too busy to actually follow up on."
Oh.
So, how did you what the hell? Can you describe remote viewing as far as what it was for, where it came from, and how you developed it?
Right. And I just want to preface this. I'm by no means an expert in it. The first time I did hear about it was in 1986, and I'll get back to that. But essentially, remote viewing is using a discipline protocol to really, the best way I can describe it, I'll do it in my own words, is to throw your consciousness, and this is the way it was described to me in 86, throwing your mind's eye, your consciousness at a distant target, picking up data on that target from, the best way I can describe it is from the ether. Some people would say out of your ass, and, being able to communicate what you're seeing or convey it in descriptors, which are words, short sentences, and, an actual drawing. I apologize. I'm not that great at describing, a textbook definition, but people can look it up. Anyone listening can just Google remote viewing or scientific remote viewing more specifically, or I think in some cases they call it CRV, and you'll get the more textbook definition. But basically, that's what it is. And in my personal experience, I was rather surprised at the results from the get-go. It was startling, in my opinion, in a good way. I dug it. I'm not one of those that gets scared about these things. I dug it. I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. This shit works. Now, recently, I've been doing some studies regarding psychology on some other issues, and I stumbled upon a piece of information that I'm going to look at what the materials that I was trained, the method I was trained on remote viewing, a little closer, because as an objective investigator, what I saw in this psychology material from decades ago makes me suspicious of an aspect of the training I was given, initial results or the test, was kind of rigged by something that the mind is already predisposed to do. And I'm very honest that, yeah, there could be something fishy about that. That aside, using the discipline, the method I was taught, I was getting results. But very soon, what I started getting was what I've been told by other people, that when I remote view, I do it on an archetypal level. I'm not the guy who people claim that if, I can't find the car keys. Okay, do remote viewing and you'll find the car keys. Okay, I'm not good at that. The stuff I get ends up being connected synchronistically to other things that either I'm researching or investigating. For instance, my Empire of the Wheel stuff involves Hecate, the goddess Hecate, and the lore related to her. Well, one of the first things I did as a remote viewing guy, student, I got what is the equivalent of like a glyph, and that glyph pointed me to Hecate in the analysis of it, ultimately. And to this day, it's still very strange that that's what came through, because I knew nothing about Hecate lore at the time. So on the one hand, yeah, I think it's real. There's a real thing there. On the other hand, I think that the methodology and the strict discipline of it, of the format of the there's a word, the protocol, I think is misleading to a lot of people, and I think in some cases kind of intentionally, in other cases not intentionally, but basically the method I was taught had 12 steps to it, and I very quickly began to realize after step 4 the remaining the remaining steps are superfluous. They're not necessary. And the guy who was training me got frustrated with me until he talked to the guy who developed the method we were using. And that guy independently said, hey, you know what, Jeff? Actually, I found out that after step 4, it's all useless. And it kind of vindicated what I was telling him. So I don't think you need to be as strict as some of the protocol guys insist. At least I've found that you don't. I think there's a basic heart of whatever this remote viewing thing is, and once you have experience with that, then I think you can do it in a much more simple protocol. I feel like I've gone purple here, so.
What about remote viewing, like far off locations? I know the idea originally for remote viewing, from what I can recall from our last discussion offline, was that it was essentially created as a means to operationally get information for information gathering.
Yes.
Intelligence.
Intel.
And you see some people who will claim to be remote viewing, to like stars far outside of our solar system, where there are, there are beings there, and they'll describe entire situations about where they currently are, and it's also a matter of like, okay, well, remote viewing has been measured in a lab before. What you're stating as far as remote viewing, that's a little that's a little more believable. A lot more people probably do it without even realizing it than they think. And then you get people who are supposed to be such high-level masters that they can, take over the body of some alien being on a planet somewhere and interact, or even just observe through the eyes of another being. How credible is something like that? And is this more of a case of bullshit going after the money, or is there something to it?
It's all of it. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that talk RV and play with it, and it's bullshit going after money or attention. Remember, in this field we're talking about, this field I'm and others are in, you have a lot of attention whores, people that are just folks that, how many times have you been in a group of people and, this guy or that guy's talking about having seen a flying saucer, and there's always that one childlike person. I saw one too, guys. But really, I did. And there's the people that want to belong and they want to be included. And so, they saw one too. I think you have that factor, with any of this stuff, RV included, So, between going for money, a buck, or just wanting to get attention and everybody, like you and celebrate you, I think you have people like that. And I think what's scary about people like that is they might start believing their own BS. But I do think you have people who can really do this and, with astonishing results, what we might consider astonishing results. So I think it's real, but I don't think everybody that comes down the pike is legitimate. And I certainly don't think, I used to think differently on this. Now I've changed my position. I don't think just anybody sitting down to do the protocols that are laid out, any method laid out, can do it or get very good results necessarily just by doing that disciplined protocol. I think it takes a little. I think somebody that might be a little more predisposed with these talents to be like the really good ones and stuff.
What are some names of some individuals who seem to be a little more credible within the field and have because I know there are some that have done bases before apparently. Let's see, was it Joseph McMoneagle?
McMoneagle. Well, when you're talking about the guys who were in that various names, Operation Grill Flame and whatever, I think Stargate or Stardust or something. Joseph McMoneagle is often considered to be the top guy. The Army program. Lynn Buchanan was one of his associates. And he's another one. Now, the guy who, the legendary Ed Dames, Dr. Doom, he was never a viewer in the program, but he developed, this method, this protocol for doing it. And of course, he famously on Coast to Coast predicted the kill shot and all this stuff, and he has kind of a checkered reputation. And I'll admit, it was the guy who came to me and trained me was a stranger who contacted me, and it was the Dames method that he trained me on. And I was already aware of Dames and his reputation, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to be objective about this, because whether Ed Dames is a knucklehead or not, maybe there's something to this method, and this guy's giving this to me for free, this training for free. So I used his protocol, and that was the one that after step 4, I began to realize that, the other steps were unnecessary. And it was Dames who confirmed to the guy training me that was the truth. So I never had any personal interaction with Dames on this, but he was never really one of the guys on the team. I think when you're talking about the guys on that original Army project, those guys are legit. It's when, in the subsequent years and in recent times, everybody and his brother, can offer a RV training program. And I think you got to be careful with that, because they'll tell you anything you want to hear to keep you pumping bucks, into the program. So you got to watch out for that kind of thing, which I think is probably prevalent today.
What kind of prerequisites does an individual need to have, if any, to start remote viewing?
None really. Just you gotta have hands and be able to write, and you gotta I guess you got to be able to see what you're writing. But I don't see why a blind person couldn't be really good at this. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. But other than, just being a living, breathing human being, now, if you're somebody who, has demonstrated legitimate sensitivities to psychic type of things, that might be what makes you better at it than the next person. But I don't think you have to, because I think maybe even if you go into it skeptical and you give it a sincere shot, let yourself believe that it can work while you're doing it, I think it could be something that might even convince a skeptic, or at least soften any hard position they have against it.
And did you ever use anything close to it, or have you seen it used in any operations for intel during your intelligence career, or was it kind of like laughed at that point?
I never used remote viewing in my career, but early on, my mentor taught me some very, what you would consider wild, esoteric, occult things to develop. And he told me that I needed to develop these skills. And what I experienced, the more I was, working as a professional investigator and someone in operations, was I experienced a heightened level of a predictive sense, an ability, definitely an ability to accurately predict behavior of a target to some degree while on surveillance. I developed that and demonstrated it. And I place that in this same category. But the things I was taught by this mentor, these wild, weird things, no, as an agent, I was never told, okay, go find the spy and use that occult technique. I didn't talk about the stuff he was teaching me to my superiors or coworkers. Okay, if I had a coworker who was one of the circle that had learned this stuff, they would let them make themselves be known, and I was told that's how it was. So am I suggesting that within the ranks of federal agentry and things like that, that there is a culture of guys that have learned any manner of esoteric, occultic type methods of getting information in odd, almost paranormal ways? Yes, I am suggesting that. But in my official duties, no, I never used remote viewing.
But unofficially, totally used remote viewing. Okay, that's all I need to know on that one. Breakaway civilizations.
Mm-hmm.
We touched on it briefly a couple of times, starting with the 1850s and going on to Germany. At least, saying that they never had a UFO can sometimes be it can either be a hot button issue for some people, but if we're talking breakaway civilizations, that could very easily be referring to the Vril Society, which was kind of fucking weird, and they disappeared at the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Is this the first indication of a breakaway civilization kind of moving off to continue on somewhere else and advance somewhere else apart from humanity, or is there an earlier 19th century explanation for this?
What my position is, and what I have written and stated, continue to do so on this German question, is the German breakaway was in existence in the 19th century, this NIMSA group. It was through direct NIMSA influence or through their associates that whatever the Nazis had developed in their esoteric technology came from NIMSA. Okay, what I'm saying is there's no evidence that the Nazis developed this flying saucer that everybody I know right now, there's people pounding the table and cursing Bosley and spewing venom. I don't care. There's no evidence for their Henneboo saucer. Okay. What they were developing was, again, whatever this Bell technology was. And what I have tried to point out and argue was whatever they learned that aided or drove them in the development of that, they got from a pre-existing German breakaway, okay, which was this NIMSA. And I think what it is the NIMSA was instrumental in the creation and rise of the Nazis, and they used them. And once it was clear that they had to cut their losses, or they had used them completely, they re-aimed the surviving Nazis out into the world, in our case through Operation Paperclip, to develop a real military-industrial complex, what we call the military-industrial complex. But the Nazis, they were used, okay? And some of the things that they developed as far as how they did business and just some of the tools they would use and stuff in the post-World War II era, I am one of those who thinks, these things were embraced by the Allies, in the United States in particular, and of course have found their way into the corporate world and stuff like that. And the surviving Nazi structure just got re-embedded back into the greater NIMSA. I think there's this is my hypothesis, that there are two operating breakaway civilizations. One of them is the German NIMSA, and that's the organization that's behind all this globalism and the oligarchs and the totalitarianism. Okay, when you talk anything New World Order, conspiracy, now we call it deep state, that's the hand of NIMSA in our world. Okay, the military-industrial complex, a product of, the influence of the Nazis we captured, who in turn, of course, are influenced and fed by NIMSA. Okay, and the other breakaway is one that I think, therefore I suggest and hypothesize, was founded in the States and was an offshoot of that technology program I talked about earlier that was developed in the post-Civil War era and resulted in the 1890s airship mystery. I think it was shortly after the 1890s airship mystery that the guys who were the brains behind that program, they broke away. And I think that they were a newer breakaway than NIMSA, obviously. So they spent the rest of the 20th century greatly developing their own thing. I think that they returned onto the scene with the last presidential election. At my empireofthewheel.blogspot.com, I've written about the apparent Trump connection to this. Okay? And if there's one group or organization that can stand up against the NIMSA, it is this other organization. I'm not saying they're a group of angels. I'm just saying I think they stand opposed to each other, and I explain all that in my blog and in my books and stuff. But I think I think there's the two breakaways. They are opposed to each other, and the greater conflict behind the conflicts we see is really the conflict between these two breakaways. The NIMSA wants to be globalist. They want to control the world. They want to control the masses and people. And I don't think these other guys do. I again, I don't think they're perfect angels, but I do think that they have our better interests in mind than, and the NIMSA, the German-based organization, does not.
Yeah, see,
that's just what I think.
I can understand that. I'm going to have to. Again, it's my views, it's my opinion. You've got your views and your opinion and research, and if I'm not going to say one way or another. For something like myself, it can be kind of hard to be able to wrap your head around. I'm trying to remember who I was having a discussion with. When I hear the term deep state, I hear that term deep state or New World Order, and I hear people who are trying to make sense out of a reality that is way too complicated for them to be able to understand. So they're going to try and give this monolithic force that can't be touched. That is going to explain.
It's a label.
Yeah. So, but if we're dealing with any forces in the world right now, you can identify pretty much a lot of the individuals, and there may be some secret societies out there of rich industrialists, but from what I understand is that if you got billions of dollars and you got a private jet and you're or if you have an entire security force that's the size of a small army of Luxembourg, you can do shit overtly and nobody's going to be able to touch you, because that's pretty much the attitude you have to have is, I don't give a fuck if anybody knows what I'm doing. Who's going to stop me? And nobody usually ever stops them unless you're dealing with something like the French Revolution. Most of these people are dealing globally on a scale that you or myself and most individuals can't even fathom or understand. You deal with somebody like Putin, who within the 15 years or 20 years that he was first came into power, and when the oligarchs within Russia were controlling him, it took him a while, or it took him a couple of terms to be able to turn around and say, hey, yeah, why are you guys controlling me? How about this? You give me half of your fortune and I won't kill you. And then we're going to see who's boss. And, he was able to acquire a large amount of money from that. If you got that kind of money and you have a nuclear arsenal behind you, I don't think you need to have some type of secret society behind you. And if there's anything else behind that, that's kind of where I call bullshit, because it's like, show me the actual nuts and bolts.
Well, see, but nowadays. But you've embraced the idea that that when people talk about this, it's definitely some monolithic power that nobody can stand against. And you're right. If it was some big monolithic power that nobody could stand against, you're right, they wouldn't hide. This is why I've never argued that. I don't think they've had such tremendous monolithic power. I think what they've had is influence. They've had very strong influence. And I think their thing has come and gone. It's had its moments where it's stronger. It's had its moments where it's a little weaker. And I think for the most part, they were able to coast on this wave of influence and having their hand in some things without any serious opposition on their level, okay? But by no means have I ever advocated that they were some deep, dark thing that nobody could stand against. I think very much so. They've had their times where they realized, we better lay low. Now, under my view, if you're talking about what I just described, you would have a lot of reasons for wanting to be doing that kind of thing in secret and kind of keep a lid on it, because look at our reaction. Just because we on the ground level, the grassroots level, a lot of people think that people above that level, they magically turn against the masses and they won't be appalled if somebody's trying to rule the world. Well, I disagree with that. That's childish. There's people on higher levels in places of power that think about things and value things the way we do. It is ridiculous to think there aren't. That's where people get off on too much of the power corrupts absolutely thing. Yes, that's a true thing, but come on, it's not automatic and 100% in all cases. There are good people in high levels. So that's why a secret type of group here, or group that would have to do these kinds of things secretly, that's why they would do that, because they know there are people, up there on the higher levels that if they combined everybody against them, they wouldn't stand a chance. And there's another reason for why they would do this secretly, is because they know they're actually outnumbered if people were to know what they were doing. So, there's, that other reason for operating secretly.
I would disagree with that, even just, and it's not to say that's not possible, but if we're talking about being completely oblivious, you look at the French Revolution, where you have the entire aristocracy of France that was acting in a certain way, and whether right. that Marie Antoinette was evil or not, the consensus is, or at least the general consensus is, that no, she wasn't a bad person. She was just completely out of touch because she didn't know want. She did, she had everything provided to her. So the common, let them, they don't have bread. Well, let them eat cake, because she thought she was being funny, but the average person on the street was just like, well, fuck this bitch, she's saying that's some mean ass, that's mean as hell.
Yeah.
And sure. You look at any of the people that were I'm gonna give you an example of this, and I'm not sure if you could see it on screen. If I try and share screen again, it's just gonna mess everything up again.
Yeah, just describe it.
All right, so you've got, this is from the I'm not even sure which newspaper it is, but it's showing the large line of private jets that are lined up at Davos, and this is where the whole idea of, if you're looking at a new world order, you're looking at you're looking at international business people who have billions of dollars, and their entire life is ostentatiousness. There's very few billionaires that I know of that live in a four-square house, of under 2,000 square feet. There's maybe one or two.
And I add, neither would we if we had billions of dollars.
No, and actually, it's been proven that people who make money very quickly, they tend to actually treat your average person worse because they know where they came from. But if you got money and your family had money, you do not relate to people like you and me. We are not human to them. That's what I'm saying. In terms of regard, there is a regard psychologically that not just being better or being superior. It's that caring about somebody's feelings, proper etiquette within a store. If I bump into you, you bump into me, we both say at least in Canada, we both say sorry, because it doesn't matter whose fault it is, we say sorry. Where for them, they wouldn't necessarily get that because they're not from that world. It's completely different customs. It's completely different upbringing. So the same idea of, this person needs to get up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and, they need to be able to worry about bills to pay. And they don't have those same worries because they never had to worry about it before. They don't get the concept.
Well, yeah, they don't have those worries, but I wouldn't characterize every one of them as being dismissive of us or lacking in all human compassion or understanding of us, on that human level. Certainly, you could point to examples, but those examples are individuals that you would point to. And yeah, I would say there's a lot of them that, that are assholes, but I wouldn't say all of them. And I wouldn't say by virtue of having that money in the background that they're automatically going to think that way.
And well, that's also kind of what I'm getting at, because if we're dealing with a global society that is meant to, like, well, first of all, what's the end goal? What is their end? Is it control? Is it power? Is it using us as food?
Joseph Farrell and Richard Dolan. They put it. Oh boy, I don't have it in front of me, but it's total. Yeah, it's basically a total control of industry, and there's a great term for it that describes it perfectly. And yeah, that's what they're after. That's where globalism and collectivism comes from.
They have it. And it's not even like
I don't think they have it as solidly as people like to think. Yeah, they have it to a greater degree than they used to. But here's where I'm coming from. If Big Brother really had this total 100% control and we're just pawns and puppets and there's nothing we can do about it, guess what? This world would be a hell of a lot worse than you think it is right now, because they truly would be out in the open. I think the reality is that they have a greater control than they used to, a greater influence than they used to, and they have more power and authority than we'd like them to have, and influence. But it's not total, and it's not enough that we are 100% slaves. Not yet.
Well, you look at it this way. Like I'm self-employed. You're self-employed. We're both beholden to others. Like, we run small businesses. We write our own paycheck. If we want to be able to go out and make more money, we'll go out and make more money. If we want to be able to expand our business and make, instead of like $70,000, make $150,000, we sit down, we think of a fucking plan, we write that shit down, we step through it, and we execute. Your average individual does not have the, and this is no offense to anybody who's out there, but your average individual does not have the time or the energy to execute that type of plan.
Right.
Well, first of all, because they weren't taught it in school. That type of financial literacy is not taught in school.
That's part of it, yeah.
Second of all is you've got the social conditioning of being beaten down, and okay, well, you go to school, you get your college degree, you go and get a job, and you work your 9 to 5, and then, you work for 35 years, and then you retire with your pension, and hope to God.
You get married, you have kids, so you have that additional responsibility.
And, these are things that we're always, that we're kind of conditioned into. So that's a drain on resources. That's a drain, like, man, my answer, and even then, it's still, for me, it's very hard. Most of my time is taken up by, my daughter. What do you think my answer is to not having the same amount of time that I had before? I don't sleep. I sleep maybe an hour or two a day at this point. But if I don't do it, I can't get anything done. Most people do not make that type of sacrifice. They're not going to be able to say, okay, well, is this something that I can live without? How many hours can I go? That type of thing. I'm not using that as a specific, but as an example. And the third thing is being it's the ability for self-manifestation, the ability to visualize, conceive, and then execute, and actually to manifest that best final outcome. Most people don't. It's something that has to be trained. You have to be able to get used to it, and without constant practice and the understanding that failure is okay, because when you fail, that's where you learn. As long as you're still breathing, you're hopefully, or at least you have control of all of your appendages, or most of them at least. You can at least get on for the next day. But you get to certain individuals like like, let's say, Zuckerberg, who was a fairly well-to-do individual in college. And now, he's running one of the largest information collection organizations that has ever existed on the planet, who's probably in bed and was bankrolled by the NSA outright from the get-go. And you look at some of the stuff Facebook does within like a 10, 15-year time period from when it first came out, it's insane. Just the ability to be able to predict whether somebody is depressed or about to commit suicide, that's one thing they're going to be implementing now. But he didn't get there by being a nice guy. He lied, cheated, and stole the pieces of the company that he needed to, or the money of the company that he needed to be able to get to this point. And at this point, he's one of the richest billionaires on the planet.
Okay.
But you look at your average person who has ethics, who has a certain amount of, you don't hurt people, you don't lie, you don't, you be good, you keep quiet, you keep your head down. Those are the types of individuals that it's very difficult to be able to get to that point where you're making $100 billion because you're not willing to have that killer instinct. First of all, because it's kind of wrong to actively screw somebody over.
Sure.
But the oligarchs in Russia, same thing. Most of these guys, if they took over, let's say, a steel plant, they, knowing that there were people that were out to kill them, I think it was like the guy who's like the largest aluminum producer. He actually went to the plant and slept there and defended it with a baseball bat or like a steel club from thugs who would come in and try and break in and kill him so that they could take the plant over, knowing that once the Soviet Union had fallen, that it was going to be one of the major organizations. And he went from like, just a middle management guy to one of the richest billionaires in the world. So, this isn't something that is otherworldly. It comes down to what is an individual willing to do to reach out and take it. What are they willing to sacrifice?
Right.
So I can't look at it from a otherworldly good and evil standpoint, because it's like I've seen that there's that condition that somebody has to be able to have to climb that ladder, and it's not something that's handed to you. There's an opportunity that you get, and you reach out, you take it, and you work your ass off for it. But
well, now we're discussing, you can point to, are you certain that there aren't very wealthy people out there who haven't done bad things? You're absolutely certain that anybody who's attained great wealth has had to be an asshole and a dick, beyond, just making tough decisions. I mean, just being an asshole and a dick with no ethics.
No, I would say like
they all are.
No, I'm going to say when it comes to like the really, really rich billionaires, like the major oligarchs, like the top 0.01%. Those are people who have like those aren't self-made. Those are people that's old money.
So you're saying everybody who's got that kind of wealth automatically becomes an oligarch? They behave like an oligarch?
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that those types of people do not necessarily understand the struggles and day-to-day obstacles that you and I would necessarily face.
They may not understand our daily struggles, but what I'm saying is, just because someone, if we're just talking, they don't understand our struggles, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an evil bastard. That just means they've had a more fortunate existence than we have in that regard. Now, when you can point to shitty things that they've done to people that they can't relate to, that's different. That's when it begins to define them as what we're talking about here. But I would venture to say that if you really looked at everybody who attained what we would consider great wealth, you might be surprised at how many very decent human beings you would actually find. There might be more of them out there. And
Keanu Reeves being one. Keanu Reeves is apparently amazing. He's like the nicest guy ever. And he's made his wealth off of acting. He's not like a multi-billionaire, because you start pitting millionaires to billionaires. That's cents to dollars in explanation.
Well, take I know recently there's the whole thing with the Harvey Weinstein thing that has come up in memes and stuff. But take Oprah Winfrey. Now, I disagree with her politically on most everything, but there's somebody she's the most wealthy woman in entertainment, right? And she's built her fortune. And I would say I'm not aware of anything rotten and nefarious or unethical she's done. And she's a lot richer than Keanu Reeves, for example. And so she's just one of what I'm talking about. I'm a great believer in look at individual behaviors and try not, because we're we're taught when we're kids, try not to paint everybody with the same brush, try not to be characterizing everybody just because they're this or they're that. And I think wealth should be included on that. I don't think you have to have sold your soul to get rich.
Well, no, and she's worth about $3 billion right now. So her salary is about $75 million a year as of 2013, but she's also been working since 1971. So we're talking a 40-year career where she built up, from nothing. It's very rare. We're talking like a lightning strike, kind of chance of getting into that being able to land that opportunity, which sets you on that path. What I'm saying is she built that up from nothing. So she is going to have that. She's going to have that mentality of having of understanding where people come from.
Right.
But you look at somebody. I'm going to say there's this one multi-billionaire playboy. Oh, I'll use a good example, and this would be the president of the United States currently, whom I can talk about. And so you have this entire mystique, which has been built around him by the right, and most people don't necessarily know what he was like when he was younger, and his views haven't necessarily changed. But he didn't make his money. Actually, his money was loaned to him illegally by his father, who was also a massive racist. And this is somebody who has been in bed with organized crime, with the Italian mafia, and he's one of the few people who was able to bankrupt a casino. How many people bankrupt a casino? I don't know very many. You're looking at an individual who has had an enormous amount of wealth, and for anybody who's dealt with him, who's talked to him, and we're talking about everybody, they paint a very negative picture of him.
Wait, everybody?
Everyone I've seen as far as interviews
go. Everyone you're sourcing,
which is a shit ton of people over a very long life.
How many? Put a number on it.
50, 100, very prominent, that have spent that were in very high profile positions.
You could name them all, and the things they said that where he's What the point I'm trying to make is it's.
But that's a hereditary wealth versus ingrained wealth. But the idea is. But how do these...
I don't demonize somebody by if they inherited their wealth. To me, that's not a
and neither would I. But again, that's the general.
I do want to say that I probably have to go in about 5 minutes because I got to go pick up my kid.
Oh my goodness. Okay,
job.
Then at least
Sorry.
I'm going to try and tie it back here. So if you have these two forces, these two international globalist and somewhat not globalist, good and bad. What I'm saying is that the people who would be in the bad would have that hereditary wealth. They would be the people who would be of that.
You can have people on the good side that are the hereditary wealth. I think
you do have it.
What we got to do is unless somebody is truly a blood on their hands criminal, stealing the money from other people, getting money because you inherited it is not in itself inherently.
But how else are you going to be able to identify?
Or it's not going to suddenly turn you into an evil person because you inherited money.
But how else are you going to be able to identify a giant monolithic secretive group of individuals if you can't say, okay, well, this person's more likely to be here, so how, who are in these groups?
How do you know that this other breakaway that I classify on the good side of the spectrum? I'm not saying they're perfect angels. I'm not saying that. But I pit them as the good guys, so to speak, just for a label. How do you know that they're not a bunch of guys who inherited their money? See, the inheriting the money is not the issue. It's their personal philosophy. These are people who, the ones who want to control, they as individuals, have embraced the idea that they're better and they want to lord it over people. And that, certainly, the ease of their life and some of the things that this money has given them might, have fed their arrogance, but it's not the fact that they had that wealth or inherited that wealth that took an otherwise what would have been a good soul and turned it evil. See, I say that there were guys who inherited the wealth who built the other breakaway. Okay, because you needed that kind of wealth to make it happen. Look, I'm not in the camp that I'm not in that. I don't demonize rich people because they're rich. I don't have an axe to grind about folks because of the money they have.
That's whether they're an asshole or
not. I tend to have trouble with people for their individual behaviors, whether they're rich or not.
Exactly. It's whether you're a good person. So I'll tell you this. I'm going to leave this at that, and then we can sign off, and I'll be able to say goodbye to you off air. Let's make let's end the discussion as far as a good versus evil. We'll make our third group with blackjack and hookers. You know what? Actually, forget the blackjack. You know what? Forget the secret group. That's all I'm going to leave. I'll let everyone else out in chat think of that. And that's my last joke for the night, ladies and. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Den of Lore with Walter Bosley, and who thank you very much for indulging me with that fantastic debate at the end. I haven't had somebody who's been able to articulate very well on the show when it comes to being able to keep civil debate on, because I can be a hothead sometimes. So.
Well, there's probably a lot of people out there listening that said he wasn't very articulate, but thank you. And I enjoyed the whole discussion. This is great. I'd like to do it again.
Well, we'd love to be able to have you back. And I'm actually just gonna play a song that everyone knows. This one's "Join the Restaurant," because I'm had such a good time tonight. Joseph gets the joke. He's like, Chris Bender-Zuger. Yes. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Chris George Zuger along with Walter Bosley for episode 77 of the Den of Lore. Go check out patreon.com/Den of Lore if you want to be able to support the show. We're going to be having on next week Clay Roop with a John Anthony West update, and we're going to be discussing ketogenic diets for cancer prevention and possibly the long-lost cure through taking care of yourself. So I'm quite excited because I haven't talked to Clay in a while. And I'm just trying to... Oh, we're not off air yet. Just trying to get a good... There we go. Oops. And transition.